I'm Jackson's bodyguard, the dog the Lee family raised to stay by his side. I've always known my place, silent, diligent, responsible. Until Jackson found the 3,000 paper stars I'd folded for him. He looked down on me, his voice laced with ice. Evan, you make me sick. The love I'd hidden for 10 years was exposed. My voice was hoarse. I'll leave as soon as possible. Jackson scoffed, his anger flaring. Leave? You'll die in this house before you leave it. I silently clutched the doctor's report in my hand and said, as respectfully as ever, yes, sir. Jackson was at the Lee family estate when I got back from the hospital. He was wearing a sharp, custom-tailored suit, smoke gray, sitting in the main armchair in the living room. I looked up, and my eyes met his deep, dark gaze. My heart did its usual frantic beat, but then it skipped one, because in front of him sat a clear glass jar, filled to the brim. A big one, full of paper stars, each with his name written on them. Seeing me walk in, Jessica, who was sitting beside him, giggled. Look, Jackson, your secret admirer is back. I froze in the doorway, a humiliating feeling washing over me, like I'd been stripped bare for everyone to see. I lowered my head, avoiding Jackson's cold stare. Jessica was Jackson's childhood friend and the Lee family's long-decided choice for his wife. She spoke in her usual spoiled tone. She mocked me. Evan, I never knew you were such a romantic. Folding paper stars, that doesn't really seem like something an MMA champion who can take on a dozen guys would do. She stood up and picked up the glass jar from the table. The next second, there was a loud crash. The jar smashed into the tea set on the table, and both shattered. Stars scattered across the tabletop, soaked and ruined by the pale yellow tea. Jessica covered her mouth, feigning surprise. Oops, my hand slipped. It's all broken. Jackson, this looks expensive. Should I pay for it? Jackson's eyes swept coolly over the mess. Just cheap trinkets. It's nothing. It was like a bucket of ice water had been dumped over my head. The cold so sharp it hurt to swallow. Cheap? That was more than 3,000 of my days and nights. 10 years, 1 star a day. The handwriting on them went from childish to mature. But the words were always the same 3, Jackson. I wrote those 3 words at the start of each strip of paper, folding them into the very center of the star. I never thought he'd find out. The housekeeper stood by with a rag, not daring to move. My feet felt like lead as I walked to the table. I wanted to salvage some of the stars that weren't wet. But as I picked one up, a shard of glass sliced my fingertip. Jackson violently grabbed my wrist. Blood trickled between my fingers and onto his hand. He dropped it a second later as if he'd been burned. His gaze was steady. Evan, what do these stars mean? I clutched the doctor's report in my hand, feeling a surge of courage for the first time in 10 years. It means I like you. I looked up into his eyes and said calmly, Jackson, I like you. I have for a long time. Jackson was always composed. He'd learned from a young age to never show his emotions. But now, for a rare moment, he frowned. He wiped the blood from his hand with a silk handkerchief, looking down at me. Evan, I've known you for 10 years and I never knew you were gay. It makes me sick. My chest felt like a silent valley, my racing heartbeat deafening. The tumor in my brain screamed in pain. A cold sweat broke out across my skin. My voice was hoarse. I'll leave as soon as possible. Now that the one thing that mattered was out in the open, all I wanted was to find a quiet place to die. Jackson shoved me back, pinning me against the sofa. He sneered, his anger growing hotter. Leave? You'll die in this house before you leave it. I silently clutched the report, now damp with cold sweat, and lowered my eyes. As respectfully as ever, I said, yes, sir. For 10 years, I'd done everything Jackson asked of me. This time would be no different, because I had brain cancer. I really was going to die soon. Jackson saved my life. 10 years ago, I was 12, fresh out of an orphanage that was basically hell on earth. I was living under a bridge when a pack of stray dogs cornered me. Jackson was the one who saved me. He stood in front of me, backlit, a god before my filthy, ragged form. The shadow he cast over me then has covered me ever since. At 17, Jackson was already composed and thoughtful. He brought me home without a second thought, like he'd picked up a stray dog. His father didn't scold him. Instead, he smiled and said, "This kid has potential. We could probably forge him into a weapon for your protection." From that day on, I was raised by the Lee family. I was hammered and honed into a blade, a weapon to protect Jackson. The training was brutal. It hurt. When the pain kept me up at night, Jackson would rub ointment on my bruises and tell me not to push myself so hard. Everyone else treated me like a tool. Only he treated me like a person. Oh, more than that. He once told me, "Evan, don't call me sir all the time. We're friends." Back then, I really thought I was his friend. I'd pester him for help with my schoolwork and obediently eat the broccoli he hated. He'd lie to his family, ditch the car full of massive bodyguards, and take me to the beach to run wild all evening. Then his parents died suddenly in a car crash, and Jackson turned dark overnight. He quickly threw himself into the city's business and social scene. He juggled his university studies while holding up the business empire his parents left behind. The world of fame and fortune has a rigid hierarchy, and Jackson was always at the very top. People would kill just for the chance to say hello to him. It was only after seeing his inner circle and the sycophants who surrounded him that I finally understood. His calling me a friend was the greatest gift he could have given. So I buried my feelings and became a blade, a guard dog at his side. I protected him with everything I had. At his command, I would tear apart anyone who tried to hurt him without a moment's hesitation. I should have been content with my place. I shouldn't have let my shameful feelings leak out. A secret crush is a kind of courtesy, like building a castle for one in private. I should have hung a plaque that read "Friends" over the main gate and hidden my love in the deepest dungeon of the castle. Because those two words were already honor enough. My compliance seemed to bother Jackson. It was too abnormal. He used to always praise me for being obedient. The rage in Jackson's eyes churned, and he abruptly stood up, moving away from me. His voice was firm. "This ends here. Don't let anyone else know." As he said it, he gave Jessica a long, hard look. He must really care about her, I thought. Or maybe he was just ashamed of me. Jackson ripped off his tie, his expression cold and weary. "You have 10 minutes. You're coming with me to the shareholders' gala." Jessica stomped her foot in frustration. "Jackson, why are you still keeping him around? You should have him beaten to a pulp and thrown out." Jackson paused on his way up the stairs, his tone unreadable. "The shareholders' meeting is coming up. Are you trying to give those old bastards an opportunity to get rid of me?" We'd already gotten word that several old board members were plotting to assassinate Jackson and seize control at the meeting. Switching out his head of security now would be too risky. Jessica's face went pale. "No, that's not what I—" Jackson cut her off. "Evan, until the family finds a replacement for you, you will keep your feelings to yourself." I lowered my gaze. "Yes, sir." His back was to me as he stood on the lavish white spiral staircase. I didn't dare even glance in his direction, not even at his silhouette. As his footsteps faded, Jessica's expression instantly changed. She shot me a look of disgust. "You fucking faggot. I always knew you had a thing for Jackson. You sick freak. Disgusting." My voice was calm, certain. "So it was you. You went through my things." I'd hidden the stars in a secret compartment in the back of my bedroom closet. I didn't have to see it to know Jessica must have torn my room apart. Jessica had seen how ruthless I could be. Now my stare terrified her, and she hid behind one of the other bodyguards. "So what if I did? Don't think just because you're halfway decent looking and took a few bullets for him that Jackson will protect you. I'm the future lady of this house. Of course." I stared at her, my voice surprisingly gentle. "I can't touch you now, but once I'm kicked out of this house, that might change." Jessica trembled. "Don't you dare threaten me. Just try to make it through tonight." Then she seemed to remember something, and a sudden confidence filled her. "Let's see if Jackson throws you out like trash after you've been used and abused." That evening, as I followed Jackson into the banquet hall, I finally understood what Jessica had meant. Every guest's eyes followed Jackson, except for one person. Rick, a member of the company's board of directors, Jackson's uncle. From the moment I entered the hall, He stared at me without blinking. The blatant lust in his eyes made me want to gouge them out. When Jackson went to the restroom, I stood guard dutifully at the door. Rick sidled up to me, placing a hand on my shoulder. Evan, I hear you like men. Actually, I've had my eye on you for a while. Why don't you come home with me tonight? I shrugged off his hand, my face blank. Mr. Lee, please have some self-respect. He wouldn't give up, leaning in closer again. His foul breath washed over my neck. Come on, Evan, smile a little. You're so handsome. Why do you only ever smile for Jackson? He doesn't even look at you. My expression didn't change, but a sharp pain lanced through my heart. It was true. Jackson had grown even colder toward me. He hadn't given me a single glance since we left the house. I ignored Rick's leering face and spat out one word. Scram. He laughed sleazily. Ha! Playing hard to get, are we? As the gala wound down, Jackson was surrounded by well-wishers escorting him to the main entrance. I stood to the side, watching him tower over the crowd. He listened politely to their small talk, nodding occasionally, a smile never quite reaching his eyes. Halfway home, he suddenly spoke. I left my watch at the venue. Evan, go get it for me. It was like a blind man seeing a flicker of light. I fought to keep my voice from shaking. Okay, I'll bring it right back. I was in such a hurry to get out of the car that I didn't see the strange look in his eyes. The venue was empty, but the main door was cracked open. The moment I stepped inside, all the lights went out. The door slammed shut at the same time. Before I could get into a defensive stance, I felt a cold prick in my thigh. My body went limp, and my consciousness began to fade. I'd been hit with a tranquilizer dart. A sharp pain in my arm brought me back to awareness. I was blindfolded. Rick's voice seemed to come from far away. It's no fun if you're unconscious. I gave you something to wake you up. My clothes were being torn off me. Rick's voice faded in and out. Evan, you've got such a beautiful body. And these legs, so long and slender. I'll go first, then we'll see what it's like with all four of us. The whole building's empty, so you can scream as loud as you want. We'd love to hear it. There were other people in the room. I bit down hard on my tongue, the pain jolting my mind back into focus. Get off. Get away from me. I struggled desperately, but my hands and feet were tied to the bed. Leak a lamb to the slaughter. A naked Rick climbed on top of me, panting eagerly. Don't be scared. It'll just hurt for a second. Then I'll make you feel good. My wrists and ankles were bleeding from the struggle, but it was useless. I forced down my revulsion and said calmly, untie me. I can't get comfortable like this. Rick chuckled perversely. Sure. Someone else protested. Boss, I heard he's a hell of a fighter. If you untie him, the tranquilizer's muscle relaxant is still in effect, Rick said. He's got no strength to run. With that, he untied the ropes. I shot my knee up toward his groin, but 3 men instantly pinned me down. Just as their fists and feet started raining down on me, the door to the room was kicked open. The footsteps that entered were steady, their rhythm so familiar it made my heart pound. It was Jackson. His voice was as calm as ever. Uncle, I never knew you had this kind of hobby. Rick was horrified. What are you doing here? A woman stormed into the room with several bodyguards, screaming, Rick, how dare you cheat on me with a man? My head was spinning. My body, which I'd managed to curl into a ball, was kicked off the bed. My forehead slammed into the sharp corner of the nightstand, and blood immediately started gushing out. Enough! Jackson's voice, usually so steady, rose several octaves. You don't kick another man's dog. Rick fell to his knees, begging. Honey, he seduced me. Please, don't divorce me. This marriage is over. The woman yelled, then stormed out. Rick gritted his teeth. Jackson, it was you. You and Jessica set this whole thing up. My mind went completely blank. No, it couldn't be. A searing pain spread from the back of my head through my entire body, accompanied by Jackson's voice. I was just playing along with your little plan. I recorded everything that happened in this room. Want to see? Or maybe you'd like everyone else to see. He recorded it. Lying on the floor, I begged him silently. Don't do this, Jackson, please don't do this. Finally, Rick conceded. You win. I'll resign from the board. When the room fell silent, Jackson removed my blindfold. He threw the bedsheet over me, but it couldn't hide my shame. He gently nudged my calf with the tip of his shoe, his tone light. All right, stop playing the victim. The man who took a bullet and still managed to drive me out of an ambush. You're telling me a little bump on the head has you down for the count? A year ago, I'd driven him to a safe house, only realizing after we arrived that a bullet had gone straight through my abdomen. He had panicked at the sight of all the blood, screaming at me not to die. But now, when I really was dying, he thought I was just playing the victim. My head felt like it was being pounded with a sledgehammer. I struggled to sit up, my voice hoarse. The watch, I couldn't find it. Jackson's expression froze for a second before he caught my swaying body. He frowned. Evan, what is wrong with you? After all this, you're still looking for a watch. There never was a watch, was there? Jackson's jaw tightened. That's not important. Not important. A small, self-deprecating laugh escaped me. I'd been by his side for so long, I'd forgotten my place. I was never important. The most secret part of my heart crumbled, leaving a massive, gaping hole. It hurt. Taking a bullet for Jackson was a price I was willing to pay. Getting injured and bleeding meant nothing to me. Even dying of cancer was acceptable. But why did being used by him hurt so much? The last bit of strength drained from my body. I couldn't hold on any longer and fell backward. As darkness closed in, I was enveloped in Jackson's signature scent. Evan. His voice sounded frantic. It had to be my imagination again. Evan, don't fall asleep, you'll die. My eyes snapped open. Everything around me was a blinding white. Snowflakes, like tiny needles, stung my face in the icy wind. My climbing partner, bundled in his gear, stood beside me. He patted my shoulder. Rested up? Let's go. I was dreaming of Fanjing Mountain again. It was all because Jackson had said, Evan, go pray for an eternal flame lamp for me. I set off immediately, climbing halfway up the mountain without a second thought. But a blizzard hit, and I nearly passed out from the cold. I forced myself up and continued toward the summit on frozen feet. Just before my body gave out, I reached the temple at the peak. I slipped away from my partner and asked the abbot for an eternal flame lamp. I was afraid asking for two would seem greedy to the gods. So, I carefully planned the space on the prayer slip and secretly wrote down 2 wishes in a tiny script. 1, for Jackson to be safe and successful. 2, for Evan to always be by his side to protect him. The lamp was lit, and I stood before the Buddha for a long time. A call came through on the spotty signal. It was Chloe, the Lee family's doctor. After so many injuries, she'd become my friend, and the only person who knew my secret. Evan, did you really go up a snowy mountain for Jackson? I stepped out of the prayer hall and answered honestly. Yeah. You're still not fully healed. Can you please stop being so obedient to him? I was freezing. I sniffled and said in a stuffy voice, It's his birthday today. She was indignant on my behalf. Ha! So you're praying for his birthday while he's celebrating on a yacht in the harbor with Jessica and his friends. You're supposed to spend your birthday with friends. I gazed at the eternal flame lamp and said softly, As long as he's happy, that's all that matters. Chloe sighed in frustration. Whatever. You'd probably worry about him losing money if he sold you. I cracked a smile, my chapped lips splitting. He wouldn't. That night, I came down with a high fever and lay unconscious on a wooden plank bed in the temple. Caught between freezing chills and burning heat, my dream and reality finally merged. When I opened my eyes again, the scene was even more surreal than the dream. You're awake? It was Chloe. My wounds had been carefully bandaged, and 4 was in my hand. Her voice cracked. You idiot. He sold you out, didn't he? Was it worth it, getting yourself into this state for him? I didn't know if it was worth it. I just thought of that eternal flame lamp. I guess I really was too greedy. My second wish couldn't come true. My throat burned. I forced out the words, Where's Jackson? You're still thinking about him. Chloe slammed my chart down on the table in anger. He called me and then left. Said there were reporters at the door. He didn't even bring you to the hospital. Your vitals are all over the place. You need a head CT at the very least. I've had one. I confessed slowly, Chloe, I have brain cancer. High grade, and it had already spread. After finally calming down a sobbing Chloe, I begged her to keep my secret. Why won't you tell him? I blinked slowly. I just want to go peacefully. I didn't want any of Jackson's pity, and I didn't want the Lee family to spend money treating me. I would never have the chance to repay them for the 10 years they had raised me. After Chloe left, I found a pen and paper on the desk in the suite. Before I could finish writing, a sharp pain shot through my head. My nose felt hot, and a few drops of blood fell onto the white paper, blooming like flowers. I wiped at them frantically, but my vision grew blurrier until everything dissolved into darkness. Couldn't see. My phone rang in the bedroom, Jackson's custom ringtone. I stumbled my way out, bumping into walls like a headless fly. The headache was unbearable. I finally collapsed onto the carpet, unable to even crawl. The door opened, and someone rushed in, yanking me to my feet. Not answering your phone, just lying on the floor playing dead. Jackson's eyes fell on the letter on the desk. A resignation letter. I heard the sound of paper tearing, and then pieces of it fell onto me. He was furious, his fingers digging into my shoulder as if they would break the bone. Evan, what the hell are you doing? I opened my eyes, disoriented, and in the darkness, I reached out and touched his face. His sharp jawline, the slight scratch of his stubble, his perfectly structured brow bones. So this is what the face of the man I love felt like. A lump formed in my throat. My eyes and nose burned. I held his face in my hands, my voice trembling with despair. Jackson, please let me go. I wanted a goodbye. Timely, dignified goodbye. But Jackson gave me no chance at all. He threw me over his shoulder and tossed me onto the bed. A second later, he was on top of me. He gritted his teeth, his words laced with an uncontrolled rage. Don't even think about it. Evan, you belong to me for the rest of your life. Struggling against him in the darkness was useless. As I drifted in and out of a sea of pain, I could hear Jackson's breathless whispers. This is what you wanted, isn't it? No, it wasn't supposed to be like this. I shook my head in a daze, but he ignored me. It's all yours, Evan. Whatever you want, I'll give it to you. Then let me go. I released my bleeding lower lip and said, I just want to leave. Jackson, let me go. He stopped, his entire body trembling with restraint. You said you'd always be by my side. Have you forgotten? Of course I hadn't. It was right after his parents had died. Rival corporations and the old board members of his own company were like salivating hyenas, hoping he would drop dead so they could feast on the Lee family fortune. I didn't dare leave his side for a second, constantly checking our surroundings, cover, blind spots, mentally mapping out every potential threat and escape route. And when danger came, I was always the first to stand in front of him. The night before his inheritance was finalized, we were in a serious car crash. As the car tumbled and rolled, I used my body to shield him, saving his life. The car was leaking gas and about to explode. I was pinned inside by a piece of rebar that had gone through my chest. I couldn't move. Sir, forget about me. Just go. He held on to me stubbornly, his eyes red as he shook his head. You're all I have left. Evan, don't die. I'm begging you. The rescue team had to cut the rebar. Jackson's voice was harsh, but the hand gripping mine was trembling. Evan, I need you to swear you won't die. Swear you'll stay by my side forever. I mustered what little strength I had left, my voice faint. Okay, I won't die. I'll always stay by your side. But who doesn't die? I couldn't see, but an image of Jackson from that day appeared in my mind. You idiot. This time you're really going to lose me.
Jackson, I'm dying.
Just as I was about to tell him everything, he got up. You didn't actually think I'd accept your confession and marry you, did you? He dressed slowly, his voice calm with a chilling rage. Evan, you're getting ahead of yourself. Just because you saved my life a few times doesn't mean you're important. Why do you think I brought you home, raised you? It was so you could do these things. A coldness spread from my bones outward. My fingertips, dangling over the side of the bed, trembled. I curled my freezing body into a ball, my voice raspy. I know. My heart went numb. So this is what it felt like to have your heart die. When I finally die, maybe it won't hurt anymore. From that day on, Jackson locked me away in a long-abandoned seaside villa. A housekeeper came every day to cook for me and take care of me. Sometimes my vision would suddenly return, and then just as suddenly, I'd be blind again. When I could no longer hide the bruises from my falls, the housekeeper called Jackson. "Mr. Lee, Evan seems to be getting worse. Maybe you should take him to a hospital." The loud music on his end of the line suddenly stopped. Jackson's voice was nonchalant. "He's faking it. He's just bored. His injuries should be mostly healed. Let him out today." The rest of his sentence was lost as the music started up again. The villa doors finally opened, and I returned to the Lee estate that evening. A goodbye wasn't necessary, but I needed to get one thing. When I walked in, the butler told me Jackson was in the backyard with Jessica, tasting wine. I whispered, "I'll be gone in a minute. Please don't tell him I was here." But as I came downstairs with the item, I ran into him. He blocked the spiral staircase, looking up at me for the first time in his life. "What's that in your hand?" I hid the drawing behind my back and met his question with silence. "Evan, even your life belongs to me. Do you really think you have the right to take a single thing from this house?" Jackson's brow furrowed, his tone demanding. "Show me." Jessica came in from the backyard and reached for the drawing behind my back. A dying man has no reason to be timid anymore. I shifted slightly and tripped her. She fell flat on her face on the stairs, knocking out a tooth on impact. She screamed and started crying, her open mouth full of blood. "Evan, I'm going to kill you." Jackson's voice boomed. "You will not. Who do you think you are? Get out." He grabbed my arm in 2 strides and turned to head back to the yard. Jessica was unnaturally quiet. The moment we stepped outside, a light breeze carried her hushed words to my ears. "Jackson, you've been playing me this whole time." Years of training made my senses scream that something was wrong. I started to turn, but in my peripheral vision, I saw Jessica raise her right hand. Instinct took over. Without a thought, I threw myself at the person next to me. One hand even automatically went to shield the back of his head. I heard the sound of a bullet entering my body and thought, since this life was yours, you can have it back. The moment I shielded Jackson and we fell into the pool, the bodyguards in the yard tackled Jessica. Blood stained the pool water red. Jackson held my limp body, pulling us to the surface. "Call an ambulance. Now." My vision was blurry. Jackson held me half upright, pressing on the wound in my back. His voice, trying so hard to be calm, trembled. "You're going to be okay. Evan, I'll save you. You've been shot before. You'll be fine this time, too. You're not going to die, you're not going to die. You're so loud." I frowned slightly. I opened my mouth, but only a cough of blood came out. Jackson saw it, and his body gave a violent, convulsive shudder. He frantically tried to wipe it away. "It's okay, it's okay. Where the hell is that ambulance?" He was always so decisive, so sure of himself, but his tone was losing its confidence. "You always listen to me, right? Evan, I'm ordering you to hang on." I looked away from him, my eyes finding the drawing that had fallen on the lawn. A little boy from the orphanage I'd bought had given it to me. He said it was a picture of me, a boy with eyes as bright as stars. It was a shame. The drawing was stained with blood now. The boy's eyes weren't bright like stars anymore. The ambulance arrived quickly. Jackson sat rigidly by my side, watching as the medics hooked me up to a dozen tubes. Maybe because he was soaked, his eyes were red and he was shaking. "It'll be okay soon. Evan's always been strong. He'll be fine." I found it all so loud, so annoying. I focused on the beeping of the heart monitor. The beeps were rapid at first, then they suddenly slowed. Then they turned into a piercing alarm. "He's in V-fib. We need to shock him." A medic grabbed the defibrillator and pressed it to my chest. When I opened my eyes again, I was floating above the ambulance. I watched calmly as the medics swarmed around my body. The continuous, shrill alarm seemed to hit Jackson like a physical blow. His eyes widened as he stared blankly at the flat line on the monitor. He was covered in blood, and water from his hair dripped onto his trembling hands. I had never seen him look so broken. His confidence was gone. "Doctor," he asked, his voice hollow, "he's not going to die, right?" The doctor avoided his gaze and answered gently, "The wound is in his chest and lungs. Sir, you should prepare yourself." "That's bullshit." Jackson grabbed the doctor's collar, the veins in his neck bulging. "He can't die." I watched his meltdown coldly, looking forward even more to the day I would finally be gone for good. I followed my body to the hospital and stopped outside the operating room. Jackson had summoned every top surgeon in the city, but they all gave him the same answer. Mr. Evans' condition was already poor, and today's injury is extremely severe. "Mr. Lee, you're lying." Jackson roared like a tyrant. "Evan is not going to die. He's always been strong. He'd follow me on business trips before his stitches were even out. That's because he valued you more than his own life." A furious shout came from the end of the hall. It was Chloe. She strode up to Jackson and said, word by word, "He's not strong. He's afraid of pain and cold, too. It's just that you always came before all of his fears. And you, Jackson," Chloe said, her voice choked with tears, "you don't care about him. You don't cherish him. You didn't even know he had brain cancer." Jackson looked like he'd been hit by a sledgehammer. He paled, asking blankly, "What cancer?" "Brain cancer." Chloe screamed hysterically. "He was already on borrowed time, and you plotted against him, used him, watched as others bullied him. Are you satisfied now? He gave you his life. Are you satisfied now?" With a dull thud, Jackson staggered backward until his head and back hit the cold wall. He shook his head, a disbelieving smile on his face.
Impossible.
"That's impossible." "Then see for yourself." Chloe threw a thick file at his chest. "Every single page in here is an injury he sustained for you. It was my medical file." Jackson flipped through it page by page. I drifted closer to look with him. I could feel his breathing grow heavier, shallower, trembling. Multiple gunshot wounds, knife wounds, countless scrapes. A piercing injury from the car crash, minor frostbite, and pneumonia from a high fever. The last page was my brain cancer diagnosis. It included the doctor's recommendations. Maintain a positive mood, get plenty of rest and nutrition, and avoid head trauma. Unfortunately, I hadn't managed to follow a single one. Jackson stared at it for a long time, then slid down the wall to the floor. His voice was hoarse, as if he'd aged years in an instant. "I didn't take care of him." Chloe pressed on relentlessly. "Take care of him? Was your idea of taking care of him telling him he was disgusting when he found out he had a terminal illness? Or making him go get that damn eternal flame lamp for you before he was even healed?" Floating nearby, I wanted to cover Chloe's mouth. "You're not supposed to be disrespectful to the gods. You'll have bad luck." Jackson's brow was furrowed in pain, his voice low. "I sent him to Fanjing Mountain to protect him from an assassination attempt. He fights too hard. I didn't want him to get hurt again. I said those things at home to put on a show for Jessica. Her father was involved in my parents' car crash, and she's obsessive. I had to get my revenge, but I couldn't let her know how much Evan meant to me, so you did Jessica's job for her and stabbed him in the heart yourself. When he needed someone to pull him up the most, you just flicked your finger and pushed him into the abyss." Chloe sneered. "Don't play the innocent victim. You had other options." She was right. Maybe at that moment, things happened too fast for Jackson to come up with a perfect plan. But later, did he really have to use me to get rid of his uncle? Obviously not. Jackson clutched his head in agony, choking on sobs, when the operating room doors opened. A weary doctor walked out, his face grim, and shook his head. Jackson stumbled over, grabbing the doctor's coat and pleading, "Save him. I'll give you anything. Is 100 million enough?" As the other doctors filed out, he roared like a madman, "What are you doing out here? Get back in there and save him." The doctor said calmly, "Mr. Lee, we did everything we could." The patient's brain tumor was already compressing his brain tissue, causing multiple instances of blindness and fainting. Did he have a previous severe lung injury? This bullet entered his lung, causing critical respiratory failure. Blindness, fainting? Jackson seemed to remember something, and his eyes instantly fogged over. So that time Jackson took a deep, shuddering breath, unable to form a complete sentence, as if fighting an intense pain. He stared into space for a long moment before saying, "I have to save him." Jackson refused to give up, so I was moved to the ICU, my body a mess of tubes and wires. He stood numbly outside the door, his eyes boring a hole through the small glass window. Chloe's eyes were red, but her voice was cold. "Who are you putting on this show for? He's only being kept alive by a ventilator. He's brain dead. If you have any conscience left, you'll let him go peacefully." I floated in the air, nodding. If it weren't for him stubbornly keeping my body alive, I might have been free by now. I wouldn't have to see him again. But Jackson acted as if he hadn't heard Chloe, his gaze still fixed on me through the glass. His breathing became very light and slow, matching the faint rise and fall of my chest under the blankets. After a long time, Jackson spoke in a low voice. Today is his birthday. So that was the second half of his sentence, the part that had been drowned out by music over the phone. So he remembered. It wasn't actually my birthday, just the day Jackson found me. When the Lee family was registering me, Jackson asked, "When's your birthday?" "Today," I had answered quietly, looking at him earnestly. "The day I met you. Let's make that my birthday." Jackson had smiled faintly, gently ruffling my hair. "Okay." Back then, I thought I was the luckiest person alive. I was no longer a bastard people could curse at. I had an identity, a home, and Jackson. But looking back now, maybe that was the day I started my descent into the abyss. A suffocating silence filled the hallway outside my room. Jackson asked another question. "When did he get sick?" Chloe let out a cold laugh. "Which sickness? The sickness of falling in love with a scumbag or the brain cancer?" "The love sickness started about 10 years ago. The brain cancer, it was already in its late stages when we found it." Jackson slowly lowered his head, the sharp, commanding aura around him suddenly crumbling. "Evan, I won't let you die," he said hoarsely. He pressed his face against the window, repeating neurotically, "Evan, give me a chance to make it up to you. From now on, I'll..." The person on the bed suddenly convulsed twice, then coughed up a mouthful of blood into the oxygen mask. The monitor next to the bed shrieked. Jackson, like a madman, tried to force his way in. "Mr. Lee, please step outside. You're interfering with our work." The doctors pushed him out. He fell to his knees in front of the door, his clasped hands trembling violently. Chloe scoffed. "Mr. Lee, I didn't know you were a believer. In that case, why don't you go to Fanjing Mountain and pray for an eternal flame lamp for Evan?" After my vitals stabilized once more, Jackson really did leave for Fanjing Mountain. Chloe and I only had one day of peace before he returned. He brought a biting chill with him, his steps unsteady, as if he could collapse at any moment. As he got closer, I saw his arm was bent at a strange angle. It had to be broken. His climbing gear was stained with blood, and he hadn't even taken it off. He refused treatment. "Doctor, can I just go in and see him?" He was freezing cold, but the air he exhaled was hot. He had a high fever. The doctor couldn't dissuade him, so he just told him to put on a protective gown and open the door. "Evan." He called my name softly, like a child who had done wrong but didn't dare ask for forgiveness. Jackson couldn't support himself any longer and collapsed to his knees by the bed. "Look what I brought you." He opened his hand, revealing a small jade tablet in his palm. "The abbot blessed this, it's a good luck charm, cough, cough." Jackson's voice was faint, but his cough was heavy. He caught his breath, then continued speaking to my unresponsive form. "I also lit an eternal flame lamp, wishing for your health and long life. I saw the one you lit for me." Jackson rested his forehead weakly against the edge of the bed, his voice breaking. "There were so many, but yours was the only one that went out. Evan, this is my karma. It went out. That's good. I don't have to protect Jackson anymore." Whether the rest of his life is peaceful and prosperous has nothing to do with me. Evan, here, hold this jade tablet, okay? Jackson carefully placed the tablet in my palm. Let it bless you and help you get better soon. Before he could finish, the jade tablet slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. Jackson's face grew even paler. His cracked, purplish lips trembled violently as he stammered. It's okay. I'll go get another one. He tried to pick up the pieces with one trembling hand, but he couldn't seem to gather all the fragments. Chloe watched him with cold eyes. This belated affection is disgusting. I followed her gaze. Jackson was slumped on the floor by the bed, and he didn't get up for a long time. He had always stood so tall, but now his back was deeply hunched. In the sterile white room, he looked like a silent, dark cloud. They had to carry an unconscious Jackson out of the room. After his bone was set and his arm was bandaged, he came right back in, his head covered in a cold sweat. He used his status as a major hospital donor to stay in the room and refused to leave. He started talking to me nonstop, saying thank you, saying he was sorry. He talked about all the things we had done together, and then all the things he wanted to do with me in the future. I couldn't leave, so I just listened quietly from the side. It suddenly occurred to me that Jackson was a lot like I used to be. I used to be so foolish, performing a silent play called Secret Love for a Blind Man. Just like Jackson now, putting on a deeply emotional performance for a comatose person. It was laughable and pathetic. A few days later, in the early morning, a call came through on my phone. It was Leo. He was my best friend from the orphanage, and now he was its director. Leo heard I was seriously injured and rushed to see me. His eyes were red as he placed a stack of drawings on my bedside table. Evan, these are all from the kids. They want you to wake up soon. Jackson's expression was numb. Can I see them? Leo frowned at him. You're the one he loves, aren't you? Jackson's eyes flickered with a brief spark of light, then dimmed again. He's my partner. I couldn't help but laugh coldly. Partner? Given everything he'd done, he didn't deserve that title. Leo's fists clenched so tightly they cracked. This is how you love him. By letting him die for you? You don't deserve him. With a dull thud, Leo's fist sent Jackson sprawling to the floor. The bodyguards outside rushed in but stopped when Jackson raised a hand. Leo grabbed him by the collar and hauled him up. You don't deserve to have him waste his life on you. Evan is the kindest, most innocent boy I've ever met. He never said a word about the abuse he suffered at the orphanage. He saved every penny he ever earned and donated it all back to the orphanage. He doesn't have a cent to his name, because he never knew which day would be his last. Jackson's forehead was cut, and blood trickled down his gaunt face onto Leo's hand. Leo shook his hand off and said, Jackson, you're disgusting. Disgusting. Jackson had said that word to me, too. As if waking from a dream, Jackson suddenly rushed toward Leo, pleading desperately, hit me again. Curse me out. Come on. Leo was taken aback and stared at him, yelling, You're insane. Jackson did seem to have gone insane. Maybe he picked up on some clues from what Leo said. He started completely ignoring his company and began investigating what had happened at the orphanage all those years ago. Within days, the director and teachers who had abused me were all arrested. Jackson hired the best lawyers in the country, determined to see them rot in prison. Then, in my name, he donated a massive amount of money to the orphanage. I don't know exactly how much. I just know he got a lot of calls that day, with people on the other end yelling that he was crazy. Yelling at him for selling his company and donating all the money to some unknown orphanage. He didn't get angry when they yelled. Instead, he started folding paper stars day and night. Inside every star, he tucked away my name. He kept folding until his fingertips were raw and blistered, until the big jar couldn't hold any more. Late at night, he would whisper in my ear, Evan, if I do this, will it make you a little happier? If you're a little happier, will you wake up? He'd look up at me, full of hope, but received no response. I watched him dispassionately. I didn't feel happy. I understood that everything Jackson was doing was just to make himself feel better. I thought, from beginning to end, he's only ever thought of himself. So when would he finally feel good enough to let me go with a clear conscience? I was getting impatient, but Jackson was never in a hurry. He spent all day in my room, as if he had nothing else to do. He spoke to me slowly, carefully washed my body, and combed my hair. Then he would sit alone in the dark until dawn. Gradually, he stopped talking. He was like a silent plant, withering before my eyes. Sometimes he would fall asleep slumped over the edge of the bed, but he slept lightly. So when someone entered the room, he would jolt awake. As he opened his eyes, a man in black was already plunging a dagger toward me. In an instant, Jackson threw himself on top of me. I never thought I'd see the day he'd take a knife for me. When Jackson subdued the attacker, the knife was still sticking out of his back. He pressed the call button for the nurse and pulled off the man's mask. It was Jessica's father. I'd heard that Jessica had been sent to prison for shooting me and had committed suicide not long after by running head first into a wall. Before she died, she confessed to all of her family's illegal activities. Her father had been on the run for months and only dared to come after Jackson once he'd dismissed his bodyguards. Pinned to the floor by Jackson, he screamed hysterically, "Jackson, your whole family should have died at my hands years ago." So he really was the one who murdered Jackson's parents. I thought Jackson would be happy to finally have his revenge. But he just silently handed the man over to the police, then staggered back to the bed to check my hand. He only relaxed after confirming that the foreline hadn't been dislodged. Then he collapsed beside me and didn't move. The doctors only noticed he was injured when they saw the blood on the floor. It had seeped through his black clothes, staining a large patch of the floor by the bed a deep red. Jackson was gone for a while this time, long enough that I thought I might turn around and see him floating there, too. With him gone, the doctors and nurses came less often. Then my body started to develop new problems. I got bed sores and started running a high fever. When Jackson returned, dressed in a hospital gown, he flew into a rage. He was much thinner, and he couldn't stop coughing. When he helped turn me over and change my dressings, beads of sweat would form on his forehead. Sometimes, a large red stain would seep through the back of his gown. I don't understand. Why did he still feel like it wasn't enough? After all this time, couldn't he accept the reality of my death with a clear conscience? This wasn't like him. He had always thought I wasn't important. As my condition took a nosedive, I was suddenly pulled back into my body. I slowly opened my eyes and saw Jackson's gaunt face. The moment our eyes met, his dull gaze was instantly lit up. "Evan, you're awake. How do you feel? Does it hurt?" Jackson was trembling all over, his voice choked with emotion. I tried to speak but found I couldn't make a sound. I'd forgotten about the breathing tube down my throat. Jackson excitedly told the doctor, "He's awake. Does this mean he'll get better soon?" I saw the doctor's hesitant expression and felt a warmth spread through my body, as if I were burning my last reserves of fuel. I understood. This was a final rally before the end. Was I finally allowed to go? To prevent what happened before, I asked Jackson for a pen and paper. He scrambled to get them, carefully and gently placing the pen in my hand. But the smile on his face froze when he saw what I wrote. I wrote very carefully, "It hurts. I want to die. Don't save me. Let me go." After I finished, the pen slipped from my fingers. As it hit the floor with a soft clatter, the heart monitor once again let out a shrill alarm. I floated up into the air and saw Jackson standing by the bed in a daze, as if he'd been clubbed over the head. He turned stiffly to look at the flat line on the monitor screen. Against the backdrop of frantically rushing medical staff, he was a still, unmoving point. "Stop." Jackson suddenly spoke. His voice was quiet, hoarse, so quiet the doctors didn't hear him. Then he shouted, "Stop! Don't touch him." Everyone froze, staring at him in shock as he fell to his knees beside the bed. Jackson sounded like he was begging, pleading for help. "Please don't hurt him. Don't touch him anymore. He's in so much pain. What do I do? What do I do?" A doctor walked slowly over to him and said gravely, "Mr. Lee, if you wish to cease resuscitation, you'll need to sign this form." Jackson slowly took the pen and paper. The black and white words seemed to burn his eyes. His eyes were bloodshot, his pupils shaking violently. But in the end, he signed. The doctor took the form. "Mr. Lee, the patient's ventilator, you need to be the one to turn it off." When there was no response for a long moment, the doctor prompted, "Mr. Lee." Jackson's bloodshot eyes rolled slightly, and he let out a muffled sound. He walked slowly to the ventilator and, like a lost child, shakily placed his finger on the red button. With a single beep, the machine stopped. The room fell into a dead silence. I watched my body slowly settle, become still, and I let out a slow breath of relief. I looked up at Jackson. His own breathing had suddenly become just as shallow. Like a malfunctioning machine, operating at an abnormally slow frequency. The nurses around him whispered, "Isn't this too cruel to the family? It's hospital policy. Nothing we can do." This patient seemed really important to him. He watched over him day and night for over half a year, even protected him when he was on the verge of death himself. And in the end, he has to be the one to send him off. It's what he deserves. If he had just let me go in the first place, we wouldn't have had to go through all this. After the medical staff left, Jackson, expressionless and silent, cleaned my body and dressed me. He was careful and meticulous, as if performing the most important task in the world. When everything was done, he sat and watched me for a while, as he always did. Then he slowly stood up and lay down beside me. He cradled my head in the crook of his arm and placed my hand on his waist. He patted my back gently, slowly, like he was lulling me to sleep. I suddenly remembered that I had once done the same for him. Back when his parents had just died, he would often cry alone in secret, unable to sleep through the night. I would hear his uneven breathing from outside his door, go into his room, and silently pat his arm in the darkness. So he remembered it all. Jackson lay on the bed until nightfall, when Leo yanked him onto the floor. "Get away from Evan. He's dead. He can't take any more bullets for you." Leo had taken care of the paperwork and had people come to take my body away. Jackson suddenly shot up, blocking their path. "What are you doing?" Leo punched him in the face. "Get out of the way. I'm going to give him a proper burial." Jackson fell to the floor and, for a moment, couldn't get back up. All the fight had gone out of him. He asked in a hoarse voice, "Where are you going to bury him?" Leo leaned down close to his ear and said, word by word, "Somewhere you will never find him." Later, Jackson did start searching for my grave. But he would never find it. Because I had told Leo a long time ago, "When I die, have my ashes scattered at sea." I love the ocean. It's free. That day, Leo took the children from the orphanage out on a boat. Once they were far from the harbor, he had the children sing my favorite song, and then he silently scattered my ashes into the sea. Amidst the children's innocent, lovely singing, I felt as if I were truly swimming freely in the ocean. Then, a gust of wind carried me away. I flew higher and higher, until everything in the world below seemed small. I suddenly thought, Jackson, he should be able to start over now. He would forget me soon and start a new life. I still hoped he would live a long, long time. That way, the chances of us meeting in the next life would be a little smaller. A new warmth and light were right in front of me, quickened my pace. Suddenly, I heard the barking of a small dog behind me. I turned and saw a little black puppy limping toward me. It stopped in front of me and started licking my ankles insistently. I gently moved away. "Who are you? You should go back. Go back and maybe you can still live." It shook its head and whimpered pathetically. That's when I noticed a deep scar on its back, and one of its front legs seemed to have been broken, bent at an unnatural angle. So it died from its injuries. I started walking again, but it followed me step for step, as if it had known me for a long time. Seeing how much it struggled to keep up, I sighed and scooped it up into my arms. "Silly puppy, you can't just trust anyone. Okay? If you do, you'll get hurt by the one you trust the most." After I said it, I smiled. It dawned on me that I should have told myself that a long time ago. Turns out I was a silly puppy too. The puppy didn't listen, just tilted its head up and grinned at me. In its round, bright eyes, there was only me. I held it tighter and continued walking toward the light. "Then let's start over together."